Okay. Good evening, everyone. Today is Thursday, August 5th, 6 p.m. We're the Waunakee Community School District Board of Education, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Ad Hoc Committee. How's everyone doing? Good? It's awesome. It's nice to see people in person. So we're going to call to order. I'm going to do the roll call. When you hear your name, please say here. Michelle Berg. Dave Boucher here. Mike Brand's not here. Audrey Deppin. Sam Kaufman here. Joel Lewis is here. Melanie Meister.
Here.
Oh, forgot your name. Monique Mobley. Izzy Moore.
Here.
I'm sorry, do you want me to call you Isabella Moore or Izzy?
Doesn't matter. Isabella, Izzy.
Okay.
I go by either.
Okay. Laura Ostrander.
Here.
Regina Pavel.
Here.
Leslie Petty. Oh, she's coming. She will be here. Mike's not here. Bethany Pottinger.
Here.
Okay. Christina Shuffleman. Diane Rusk. I'm
Here.
sorry.
That's all right.
Leah's not here. Allison Bowler.
Here.
And Tim Shell.
Here.
Okay. All right. So we're going to approve the agenda. I'm hoping people have seen the agenda. Could I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second. Second. All approve? All oppose? Okay. There's no public comments?
I haven't seen any public comments come through.
Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is discussion and possible action on interim recommendations to the Waunakee School District Board of Education regarding issues of immediate concern. Subsection A, recommendations on the creation of enactment of a dedicated reporting system / policy for events of bias and bigotry. So basically that's a reporting tool that Tim and myself will be talking about.
Sorry to interrupt. Do we also need to approve the minutes?
No,
Oh, I'm sorry.
we don't have it on this agenda,
Oh, okay.
because they've been, oh, yeah, they are.
Oh, yeah, they
Yeah,
are.
they are.
I'm sorry.
Sometimes we
Thank
don't
you.
have it approved already.
Thank you. Does someone want to make a motion to approve the minutes?
So
Okay, second.
Second. I was gonna say I was not here, but I did watch the recording.
Okay. All approve? All oppose? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to start with the reporting tool. You want to start off, Tim?
Yeah, and so this has been sitting out there for a while. You know, I think to be clear, from an administrative standpoint, we're going to introduce a reporting tool this year regardless. It's not typically the kind of thing we would seek board approval for. However, there are aspects, if we were to do something like a requirement that summary data off the reporting tool were to be coming to an advisory committee like this, or the board on a quarterly basis, annual basis, what have you, that's the kind of thing from a policy perspective the board might choose to put in. And in addition, something we've talked around the table is it's one thing to have a reporting tool, but we've also talked about the value of potentially having a third party who was not a member of district administration or district group services that might get the report if the reporter decided that they wanted to include this kind of third party advocate. And that enhancement is the type of thing that would typically probably involve some feedback from the board. So parts of this, you can be confident, you know, would occur anyways. Other parts of the recommendation of the board, you know, is around kind of like larger scale reporting, the role of an ombudsperson, something like that. You know, certainly, I think it's an important question. We had looked at an earlier draft, and this draft is only slightly changed from the one from May. And we had the opportunity, those of you who took it, and thank you for doing that, to provide feedback. I just pulled that before the meeting. I haven't had an opportunity to do it yet. And Rebecca, I could trouble you to pull up our shared drive for the committee. I dropped the summary of everything that's in there. I'm doing that because we've got, members of the public will be looking at this later, and Mel is zooming in. Want everybody to be on an even playing field for seeing kind of the feedback folks had on the surveys.
This one?
Yeah, that one.
Did everybody get a chance to, well, did everybody get Tim's email? Did everybody try to kind of play around with the reporting tool?
So we had, pretty good response, a mix of staff, and we had parents and community members. And if we could go down, one of the big questions was, what are your thoughts on the reading level? Is the reading level appropriate? Is, with the understanding that we would, once the tool is finalized, at least for its first version, would be getting it into Spanish. But the question would be, what about reading support? And so we had 2 people who felt like the level was appropriate, but we would need to have some ideas about for folks that needed assistance, how they could get it. And then that might not be necessary, but then we had some others. If we look down at the comments, we do have some comments here. And we had a few different, but I mean, one was modified version with readability at an elementary level. And I think if we go a little further, really valid point, students at younger grades will need help reading and understanding many of the options presented. They need to be able to access an adult who's safe to fill out the form. Many students without an awareness of the form. Languages, it would be available in Spanish. Elementary level would be good to explore in the future. Surveys in depth, I do think there's a lot to read, perhaps simplify. Readability is too high, not just for elementary, but for secondary and family members. Run it through a flesh. So I mean, I think these are all good. While this is closely modeled on surveys that are already out being used by other school districts, we could potentially improve the readability of it. And I do think the whole question about younger kids, is really, really an important one. We go just a little further, Rebecca. One thing we talked about in May was, should we keep the question that distinguishes between bias incidents and incidents involving bullying, harassment, or hazing, but not due to bias. And we split pretty evenly on that. So, I mean, I think that's a great topic for discussion tonight when we talk about simplifying the tool. Maybe that's it. And do we have anything else? That may be the, okay. And then additions, if you keep going, additions to the tool. Reporting tool is student focused. Consider general language that targets the entire school district. The inappropriate behavior goes beyond students' educational experiences. Staff and faculty are also victims of harassment and implicit bias. Instructions that would give you a sense of what the process was and what the next steps were. If we use the term bullying, perhaps teasing out the formal definition. Many people consider teasing bullying, but there's actually a definition that involves purposefulness and balance of power, repetitive occurring for a period of time. That's good feedback. We keep going. Anything removed? The question about harassment versus bias. We come out of a follow-up conversation, could be hard for a student to do on their own. Is this tool primarily for students or staff? Should there be different reporting tools for students versus adults? Why is race versus color separating the survey? How are you differentiating the two? Do people know the difference? That's a really important topic I hope we come back to in the conversation. Part at the end that says restorative practices for the aggressor. Restorative practices can be mutually beneficial for the person who has done the harm and the person who was harmed. And then I think it's too much. I like this school's very simple version. And Rebecca, I don't know if we can click on that link and maybe bring it up. So you would select a site. Let's see how far we can go without creating a problem. We don't want to create work for Alacanas High School. Okay.
I'm getting triggered
Yeah, put test in there.
right
We test, we meet no harm.
make up a.
Location. Okay, so we want to stop now, Rebecca. So we don't create work for that. So this is much more simple. Now, I will say this. Well, no, it's just much more simple. I'm sure we can have a discussion about this later. So that was kind of the gist of all the feedback we had on the reporting form. So, all right, additional comments. There's a lot in there. Some minor punctuation errors, which I'm sure we can fix. And again, you know, we have those two lanes. And once you pick, the questions are the same. So it's not like you've got double lanes, but it does ask you to kind of, in your mind, was this a bias incident or bullying and harassment? And maybe it should be a lot more simple. So with all of that, you know, how do you want to kind of open the floor for more exploration?
Yeah, so this is not like a final draft. So like obviously with punctuation and stuff, all that'll be corrected.
Yeah.
I think it's really more about figuring out if we have what we need in there, we're missing something. I think the thing is that what I liked about the tool was that I liked the different choices in terms of, because if you responded a certain way, like I did a gender bias, right? So I wanted to kind of see like what would happen on that. So I think maybe those areas, we need more, you know, detail or more like drop down boxes, right? But when it came to like race, it seemed like it gave this whole, actually, Rebecca, would you be able to pull up the tool? Maybe how about we just do it now?
Yeah, so go back.
And we'll do like
And
maybe
it's in
2 or
the-
3
up.
It
situations.
was
you could-
difficult to tell what it would look like if you did different things and remember it by the time you got to the, so I did struggle with
Yeah.
that.
So what do you want me to do?
So let's do online race. So race.
And so this is a PDF. This is the entire thing.
Okay.
So
So, you know, I have to say in the beginning, when I saw, is this a safety concern related to yourself or another student? Safety kind of threw me away, but then I realized that that is its own thing, right?
Mhm.
Tim?
Yeah, it would be, yeah.
That would be its own thing. So let's say, this is related to yourself or another student. Just put yes for that first level.
Yeah, this is a PDF. You won't be
Like-
able to.
Oh, you won't be able to see PDF.
But I can explain kind of where. to
Oh,
go
okay.
after, so.
Keep
Can I,
going.
Yeah.
can I ask about that question? I was confused by that one. I was the one who commented about it being a yes or no question. So I was reading it like, is this a safety concern related to yourself or related to another student? But was I misreading that? Is it actually asking, is it a safety concern?
I think the second one really asks you which it is.
Okay,
First
I
Yeah.
one is just, is it a safety concern?
got it.
So
like,
that's why the
are you
confusion.
safe?
Yeah,
Got it.
right, Tim, that's the same thing.
Yes.
Yeah,
I wonder if that could be worded a little bit differently, like,
Just cut off
is there a
after
safety
concern.
concern?
yeah.
Or
Okay.
something like that.
I
just
mean,
because I
the
was-
idea of that question is that this allows for a branch of the tool.
Yeah.
There's a safety concern track, and then there's a non-safety concern
Yeah.
track.
Now I
So
get it.
you're right,
I-
that would make it more clear.
So for
Yeah.
instance, if somebody's getting abused, right,
Totally.
physically abused.
Yeah,
um,
that makes a lot more sense. I was just confused. I thought the options were it's related to myself or it's related to another student. So
Yeah.
that makes it a lot more clear.
And the second question really gets
Yeah.
to that.
I wonder if the wording, I saw the same thing. I wonder if the wording on the first one should be something like, is there a safety concern for anyone related to this incident? That way, it could be you, it could be anyone else.
Yeah.
It's just, is there, it doesn't seem to really say that there's a issue of imminent threat or harm to anyone in the way it's worded.
Well, and there's a reason for that, Dave, and probably the whole thing could be more clear. If there's imminent
Yeah.
danger or harm, the
Right,
individual
they
should
should
be
be
called
all-
911.
I shouldn't have used the word imminent.
Right.
But
But-
is there a potential safety, maybe it's, is there a potential safety concern for anyone around this incident?
Tim, does it prompt you if you were to click yes? Does it prompt you again to say if there's immediate concern, call 911? If you
No,
said
but
yes,
it could.
because at the top you might just not register that first part.
Mhm.
I mean, it is giant, but
Because I'm assuming if you check yes, then that first part should come up saying that you need to make sure that you're. But then it's also what happened if that's a child doing that, or an adult. I guess that's an area where we could probably kind of figure out.
And again, I mean, there are two, so we just saw a very simple tool for another, so one option would be not to have a branch for safety concerns at all, and have this only be a tool for reporting biases.
I think there are things that happen in people's homes that I think it would be nice to be able to give them that ability to. So me personally, I think I like the safety concerns. I think maybe we just need to kind of like isolate it a little bit more so people know exactly that, if it is that safety concern, here's this. But I'm assuming anyway, this is going to be triggered by other people, right, within the school district. So then they're going to already know to follow up on this stuff. So it's not going to be like a lost.
Right, so there's an element of this, there's obviously the overwhelming focus on this is to kind of surface bias incidents, harassment. There's a little bit of other purposes being fulfilled here, and this is one. Because you don't want to have, I know there's a question about different reporting tools for different purposes, but that could get complicated. Which place am I supposed to go? So this is supposed to be kind of a general purpose, and not only for youth to self-report or to have others to report on part of youth, but if you're a staff member experiencing an issue, if you are having observed an issue, or if you're a community member visiting the school, so you see something happen, or something happens to you, it would be an opportunity to submit.
So I know one of the questions came up that what happened, it's not focused on staff, obviously, is there a different process within the school? Like, so just say a staff member is dealing with another coworker who's doing things, I'm assuming you have a different process for that.
Well, there's a different process for that, just like there'd be a process without a tool for a student who's having a challenge with another student to go to a teacher, go to the principal directly. This is intended to be something that could even be anonymous. You don't have to identify yourself in the course of submitting this. So this is intended to kind of fill that aspect that we don't currently.
I just wanted to make sure that there's another process, just to answer that question that somebody submitted before, that a staff would be able to utilize something already in place.
but to clarify, Tim, that process is just talk to your administrator.
It is, just like if a student had a concern, we would say, so this would be an alternative to talking to a supervisory or an authority figure.
So then it seems, because this concern about me could apply to a student or a staff member, but this concern is about another student would mean that if you're reporting for somebody else, you're not ever reporting for another staff person. And I'm just thinking of, a situation where maybe there's student field placement or something like that, where I'm just trying to think of the fit. I'm not clear if a staff member could use this, then it seems like maybe we have to make sure that they see themselves in the survey.
So there's two thoughts here. I mean, one would be, we could change student to person, and that could open the whole thing up. The second is safety concerns. Students would generally be minors. Staff members would not be minors. So I think there is a little bit of an assumption that safety concerns, we're talking about safety concerns involving a minor. But you're right, that's not clear here. And if that was the intent, we would want to make that one.
I mean, maybe a suggestion, because, you know, I do feel like staff should probably be able to access this as well, right? So maybe that we look at that to see how we can incorporate that, where a staff would be able to do that. Because if a staff does that anonymously, how does that work? So just say a staff just says, well, I'm getting harassed by another staff member, but they don't want to necessarily, they're afraid to report it because, you know, they don't know what's going to happen, that type of thing. They want to say, what happened? Like, what is that process?
For them to submit something.
Like, so just say they're in the lunchroom and, you know, somebody's telling, you know, jokes that are just, you know, not good. And then they keep hearing it and they're just tired of it. So, but they want to say something, but they also don't want to out themselves, you know, because they don't want to, you know.
I suppose, I mean, you know, I'll kind of defer to the teachers here about kind of how you might approach it. I mean, you could get creative and submit something into the principal's mailbox, for example. But we are not particularly set up for anonymous reporting that way. So this would provide an option for that. And again, I mean, you go further in, and I think the tool is a little less student language. It's mainly the safety section where I think this comes up. But I mean, if we get further in, we can kind of see what people think. But
Does anybody want to comment to that? I'm not staff, so I don't know. But
I mean, are we open to considering having it be a form that applies both to students and staff?
well, this form is intended to apply for everybody.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't, that isn't communicated by the language. My interpretation just from taking it as a draft was that it wasn't for me.
Okay.
So, I mean, if it's important that we collect data about whether it's submitted by a student or a staff member, that could be the first question. If we want to have it be an optional, you don't have to say that you're a staff person, then we could throw that idea out. But perhaps if you answer one way, it can take you to a question that asks for verbiage like another student.
Okay.
You know, if you go the route of, if you say no to safety and it takes you to the bias, well, I guess it takes you to the harassment or bias incident. It follows up with the question
I was going to
about,
say, yeah.
who is the target of the incident that you are reporting? And then it gives that whole selection, me, students, staff, other. Does that have to be all the way down, or could that be right on the top? And then go to the safety and.
So again, this is a PDF of the whole thing that doesn't show branching. You'd get in there, you'd have the safe, is this a safety concern question? If you say yes, then the rest of those safety questions are revealed. If you say no, you will skip to. So if you say no on the safety concern, you won't see any of this up above, and you'll skip directly to here, which then takes you to the next branch, which I think is a really important thing for us to discuss. Do we want two separate branches here, or do we just want to say we have an incident and we're going to collect incident information about bias along the way?
you know, I like how you spelled that out, like harassment, and you start to talk about bias, and then you talk about age, ancestry, color, disability. Like, I mean, for me, I like that. Because then someone might be able to identify with one of those things that you're talking about. Because think about if it's a community member, right? They might be like, well, this is not really harassment, right? It's this, right? So I think the more like verbiage maybe, and when I say verbiage, like the way it's up there, I think that's a good thing. Because people might be able to identify.
Or is that confusing to a student? Because you could be like, well, it's kind of both. I don't know which one. Because in their mind, they're like, well, it is a gender or color thing, but the harassing me, I'm not sure which one to put.
Right, are they exclusive? I mean, can you not be harassed or bullied based on bias?
That's what I thought too, that question would cause confusion from the student perspective, because would it be more like when any follow-up is done in response to that, that discussion could be had around determining incident methods? Because I just was thinking from like a student perspective that it's too early.
What do we gain by having them identify what it is? Wouldn't our follow-up or investigation into it help identify it more?
Only if there's an investigation and follow-up.
Well, I mean, whatever they put in, okay, whatever they put in the report, as far as their description and everything, they may describe something that they may mark as bullying, but you may feel when you read the description, it's really a bias incident. Or the other way around. Having them try to determine which of the two it is, I'm not sure that gives us anything.
So this is a really, from a terms of designing a tool like this is a very important design question. You see different places do different things. The simpler one we saw assumes, it doesn't assume because you have an option for anonymous reporting, but if you select the anonymity option in that shorter form, you might have a little information in that description, but there aren't a lot of questions that provide attributes to the event. So if it's an anonymous event, you don't really have a lot to analyze later on. This tool, and this is partly what makes it so involved, and there's a price, Michelle and others have mentioned, there's a price to it being so comprehensive. It means that if the person wants to submit it anonymously, so there really can't be a follow-up, from a reporting standpoint and kind of analyzing our environment, we still have a lot of, potentially, have a lot of information about the type of activity that could inform future actions. So again, there are definitely trade-offs. This is probably on the highly complete side. I'll try to spin that positively. And the other one was very direct, and maybe there's a sweet spot in the middle.
I think it's really important to have that data so that we as a staff and as a school district know what kinds of things are happening. But I wonder if there would be less of a burden on the person reporting if we took the information that comes later, and granted, I'm not sure which branches, which information comes from, but it seems like there's an opportunity to describe the incident. And so it seems like whoever's getting the information could look at the incident and be like, ooh, that seems like it was bias involved, or that seems like there wasn't bias involved, but then make sure that whoever's getting the information is making documenting it was bias or not, even if we're not asking the person doing the reporting to identify that.
Yeah, just to add on to what I think it was Bethany saying, is that isn't it just like 2 questions later, it says, was the incident based off of any of these things? And we have a bunch they can select, and they include all those, the race, the color, gender, other, and wouldn't that just automatically then classify it as a bias incident if they click one or more of those?
It would. I think the way the logic is set up, those only appear if the person selects bias incident. But we could streamline the whole thing down and then avoid all the fancy branching and pretty much have one form. That's certainly a possibility.
Well, and I'm in the live form right now, and I haven't even selected my concern, harassment or bias, and I can still see that question.
Okay.
But if you think about it already, I'm assuming the school already has a harassment policy. Like to me, this tool is more of a bias incident, right? So I'm assuming, I don't have the policy up now, but I'm assuming the school already addresses harassment when you start talking about cyberbullying, physical, that type of stuff. So I think a focus, I mean, if we had to take that out, I would probably say, I would rather that thing say, is this a bias incident? And then listen to those things versus just keeping it general as harassment. Because I think, you know, that's already addressed.
By policy, but not by a reporting tool.
But then if that's the case, then that's why I said, I think more is better versus just trying to streamline it. I think it has to be simple where people, or anybody can just say, okay, I understand this. But I think the only thing I worry about is that, you know, if it is a bias incident and it just kind of gets brushed off, well, this might just be, you know, kids joking kids, this is a harassment thing. So this is my thought.
Yeah, thanks. I hear what you're saying. Adding on to that, I think my worry is access. If I'm looking at this in terms of reading, in terms of length of questions, in terms of the content involved, I'm worried that if it's too complicated, people might not take it at all, and we won't have any data, is one piece. The other piece is instead of having all these drop downs that we're assuming as the stakeholders that created this, where it might lead, whether if it's a gender or a race, we're kind of leading in what we think those check boxes will be instead of the more open-ended, what was the incident? Where did it happen? I mean, what are those rocks of information that we need to know that are easily accessible, but may not feel overwhelming, instead of a Dropbox, maybe an open-ended.
I think your point about not wanting to misidentify a bias incident as something else. The problem is by asking that question, you're asking a person, especially if you're talking kids in 5th, 6th grade, 7th, 8th grade, maybe even 9 through 12, you're asking them to know a lot about these type of definitions and where these categories should be and what their incident falls in. And especially if it becomes drop-down menus, if it sets you down another path of the flow chart, that I think is problematic. I kind of like the idea of give us the information. I think it's important to have questions like, take for example, the one at the bottom where people are saying, well, what things were involved in it? That's great because it helps people fill out their story that they may not think to include. But if we start up with that question of tell us what type of incident you fall under, bias or whatever, we've pigeonholed them and they may miscategorize themselves and we may miss important data later. Like if they say it was a bullying incident and then we don't ask them about the different types of biases that might have been involved in it, we wouldn't know. They just pushed us right out of the bias category and forced themselves down a hole that kept us from getting information. I like the extra information in the other questions, but I think it should come almost after they give us the main part of information so they don't drop out of the tool. I mean, I know I've seen that in military surveys all the time where I'm sitting on the other end with the data and how many people drop out after question number 5 or 6 and they just say, I'm done.
So I mean, I think,
Right.
you know, there are different ways.
That's a tough balance.
Yeah, there's different ways to approach this, and you know, I think if I'm seeing it on the other end, Dave, you'll recognize this. Part of this is you're going to have some potential reporters who would rather click a few buttons, give their contact information, and do the follow-up that way, rather than writing out a few sentences describing the incident. So that's the argument for offering this where they want to be contacted. The other argument for presenting it like this is for folks that want to remain anonymous. It's very clean when you click a button. They may feel if they input free text, they may worry that they put in enough context that then it can be inferred. But by the same token, you're right. I mean, there's fatigue. If you really want to do it and you get too deep into a form, especially if you've seen something that's been upsetting or you've experienced something that's been upsetting, you may just shut down and say, forget about it.
Where, if you pick bias or if you pick bullying, just the two categories, where does that take you? Everywhere still?
Very similar, you get very similar things no matter which way you go.
Okay. so
But that
doesn't
sorts it
divide
into
you
two
up.
different tracks.
So I'm all for words being on the page because the individual filling it out may or may not have the words to put in the box to describe the incident. And I might be alone here, but I think the more little check boxes a person can pick, if they want to say unwelcome verbal, physical conduct, check, cyberbullying, check. I mean, if they want to check off multiple boxes, the question is, tell us, describe what happened. And for the person to be able to select multiple things, it could save them from having to put things in the box if they don't really know how to describe it, or if they're in a hurry and they're afraid they can't fill out a whole form. It might give a lot of data that I realize might, be a little bit harder to interpret, but I always think, a person we can be very simple, but then that puts the interpretation on the person reading the response. It's better to have the individual give us as much information as they want to give us. And they don't have to be forced to click a box. They could leave stuff blank, correct? So that's my thought, because I think those definitions are really important. I would probably just format it differently. So you see it in just a few words and some spaces, and you can pick what applies to you.
Sam, did you have something? I don't know if you raised your hand.
No, I had similar thoughts about the boxes.
I will say this. There's probably an assumption here that if you have a younger individual, that they are going to approach a trusted older individual to report. Classic example would be a child that experiences something upsetting in the school setting, and they go home and they tell their parent or responsible adult, and parent or responsible adult might call the school directly, or they might do this. It definitely has applicability to staff. Again, adults who've experienced trauma may not want an overlong form either. But I'm very interested, Izzy and Sam, one of the big intended audiences here would be our middle school and high school students. You're our committee members that are closest to that experience.
And do you think the incidents you've experienced or seen, you could convey via this tool?
Okay, so for me personally, I was just like looking at it, it's kind of wordy, just like for me, like let's say like I got harassed or whatever, and I was just filling this out like in the cafeteria, just like get this done and over with. It would be like I'm trying to like read over this stuff, and it's just like a lot of wordy and a lot of different work, like it's just very wordy to me personally, and just like I don't know, like a middle schooler, harassment, bullying, and the bias incident, like they can read that, but they still don't really understand what that is, if that makes sense. Like if you ask me as a middle schooler, would have completely not known what that is.
So my question to you then, as a middle schooler, would you even use this tool?
I would, for me, I wish it was more simplified. Like I liked when for the one that we looked at before, the simple one, it's like what school district you were in. But like I wish that like when you click one of those, it went to like a simpler form. So like if you were like in elementary school, it would be like simple words for them. If you're a middle schooler, it would be some middle school words, if high school words like that. That's what I wish it would be like.
That's a great idea.
And for staff, we could put it in what?
No.
Well,
You're selling our folks short. I think instead of Latin, I think we can go for ancient Greek.
I also would share that I looked at it on my phone. It's no good.
Yeah, like looking at it on your phone. I was just looking at it, I'm like, if I was filling this out in high school, even like as senior, I would have been like, no, I'm not doing, I'd rather just go tell a teacher.
So now we need a desktop and a mobile version.
Well, it's
And a
just
by grade
limiting the
version.
text or making sure that the text on a mobile device is accessible.
Conversion, yeah.
I gotta admit, if you're doing students, I would expect
It's
the
gonna be done on
majority
the
of them are gonna be on the
On
phone.
the phone.
Yeah.
Good point.
That's a good one.
Sam, you, if you wanted to add.
I think for me personally, and granted, I was always at a pretty high reading level and all that. This would have worked for me, but I could see for the majority of students it would not. It's too wordy, and when it takes time to think about those words, then it takes a considerable amount of time to take the survey, and then kids will just give up.
You don't want that.
Right.
Especially if they're upset.
And one thing is with this tool, obviously we would, test it, just like we tested with this group, it's no different than testing with the community and testing it with, groups of kids or different ages, that type of stuff. So this is not like the final thing, but I think it's really good to have this input.
So what I think I'm hearing is take the thing back, simplify the language.
Or age appropriate language. off the
Well,
first
and maybe the branching should be Izzy's branching, which is if they pick some of the lower graded schools, they get a very simple form. And if they pick middle school or high school, they get something closer to this, but not this language, something more
Let's do
easy
that
than
way
that.
too. You can get, you can tell if they're, what age they are, and staff member too, because you can break it out if student or staff member at that specific school.
And at that point, you could probably allow for you to select that you're a staff member if you don't want to remain anonymously a staff member.
And I mean, it's truly anonymous. It's not like they're telling you it's anonymous, but then they have your name in the background.
Yeah.
So it's truly anonymous because that integrity has to be there, or else people are not going to use this.
Can you clarify, and maybe you don't know this yet either, but at the beginning you were talking about like who is going to receive this information or kind of be in charge of any follow-up? Whose decision, like is that administrator's decision of who will be doing that? Will it be the school board or combination? It's just, to me, it's kind of interesting to think through like who will be that person or the group of people that will be following up with that.
Well, so that's a great question. If we could go a little further down in here, past all of this. Okay, right. So what happens, this was the thinking, what happens when a report is received? And realistically, number 5, if we were to start this as the school year, basically where we are on the calendar, it'd probably be 1 through 4, and we would probably have to work with the board to secure permission for number 5. But the idea was it would go to an administrator at each school. So it probably would go to both the principal and the associate principal if it was a school that had an associate principal. And then depending on their assessment of it, these are people that might be involved. The SRO, HR if it involved an employee, assistant principal, or advisor chair regarding student relations, et cetera. Other school officials on a need-to-know basis. And then something we talked about, but again, this is kind of a policy change, and this is, so I mean, would really like to have this ready to go a few weeks from now, even if we make changes later on. It probably couldn't have an ombudsperson yet because we would need to kind of bring that to the board and have the board sign off, because this is a unique role that we don't currently have. We've talked about it here. I think in the committee, we thought that could be good because we may have people that don't want to be anonymous, but they don't want to necessarily have it go for whatever reason to a principal or an AP. And here's this third-party person that it could go.
Could also involve them, right?
I mean, well, that would be one reason why you might not want it to go to the principal of the AP, if the principal of the AP were actually part of the incident.
I think number 5 is more of a neutral, like what Tim was saying. That's more of a neutral person that you don't have to worry about. That there's going to be something's going to happen to you, or because when you talk about staff, I think that's really important, right? It does happen, and a lot of times it doesn't come to the surface, but there has to be a safe process for that to, because you want to be able to identify that if you're having those issues within the school. So,
Could you go up a little bit, the place where there's two choices, yeah, designated district staff. So it sounds like those choices would have to be different than if that third party wasn't in line, and could it be, so let's say, you know, you don't want it to go to your principal, but you'd like it to go to the administration office, or, I mean, are there any choices, or because that third party isn't available, it would just be designated district staff?
So we could make it, it's the way it is to keep it from having more complexity. I mean, you could say, so we'd take the ombudsperson out, would say principal or associate principal for the school, or, and in our district, our non-discrimination officers would be Brian Grabarsky, our HR director, and Tiffany Loken, our director of special education. I've actually got a C post of the organization, if it's Tiffany or Chris Mand, but we have two. So that would be an option. But again, part of this is you're trying to serve a traditional incident. Something happened at a basketball game. I want Brian Borowski to know about it so administration can follow up. Or something happened at the game and for whatever reason, I want it known, but I don't want it followed up on. I just want to report it. So, I mean, you're trying to do some different things here. And that could be an option too. Who do you want? You know, we could say principal or associate principal for the site. You could have district non-discrimination officers. And then should the board approve the third party, then we could have the third party as an option.
but the good thing is though, when you have more people, and I understand what you're saying about, like, obviously, maybe you don't want it to go to a certain person, right? But I think the more people that can actually see it, then the other people hold other people accountable.
Right.
Because if there's one person or two people, and maybe they're the problems, honestly. You know, so it's nice to have more to be like, okay, well, I see something different as a third person, or, you know. So I think you might want to think about that too. That I think that type of ability to have more people to keep their hand, to put their hands on it, I think keeps people accountable. If somebody wants to go down that route, and not kind of like, you know, squash it without it becoming something.
So the one question I would have, how many middle schoolers know what an unbuzzing is?
How many grown-ups?
I mean, like, honestly, how many
I looked it up.
folks know what an unbuzzing is? How many?
You
I
probably
mean, if
know
you
what a
walked
board
into
is.
a class of seventh graders and you mentioned the word ombudsman, how many of them would literally understand what that is? That individual would be. And that is a person with neutrality, right? That is a neutral person, but would they understand? Would they be checking off?
So you'd have to do a lot of education around the tool. So that would be an option. And you know, again, this is a draft.
Which I think it makes, you know, what I think it makes sense to have a neutral person outside of administration. But I do think that, you know, that title isn't quite understood by many.
And maybe we place a neutral person appointed by the board. I mean, I think the challenge is the whole concept is, as adults, most of us understand the concept, but it's not a common concept. And we don't really have fourth grader language for it. You know?
Safety officer?
Oh, wouldn't that be like a police officer? Right. Like
You know,
that
I
would
mean,
be
we could say Captain America,
Yeah,
you know, or the
right.
Black
There you go.
Panther or something like, you know, like a
Yeah.
Marvel hero. But I mean, you make a great point, Leslie. I mean,
Yeah.
ombudsperson, I think, has got to go.
Yeah.
But didn't you also say, like what Izzy was saying, if you pick the version that's elementary,
Yeah.
maybe it doesn't use that terminology,
Yes.
you know, so maybe that, I mean, as
Yeah.
adults, I guess we gotta look it up.
I don't.
But you're right.
Tim, if the goal of this is to be kind of hopefully, like, starting with the new school year, something too, as like a staff member, I think about clarifying what the difference is with EduClimber for like behavior reporting. That's what staff, it's a program that staff can use to submit behavior incidents. Because I could see that this could cause confusion, like should they start reporting with this, or should they be using EduClimber? And I know this past year with COVID, that was kind of put on the side a little bit too.
And this shouldn't take anything out of EduClimber. I mean, staff could use this, but in reality, where staff would use this, I think would be for something that pertains to staff.
Okay,
You know,
Yeah.
this is really intended to fill gaps in our reporting that we aren't currently getting. Because something we've heard around this table is there's a lot going on out there where we aren't really capturing it and addressing. One, we're not capturing it and addressing it properly. So there is follow-up and accountability. We're also hearing that there are things happening that we don't have good information on at kind of a summary level. So just even kind of sitting, what are our problems? Oh, we have a lot of homophobic bias incidents going on. Clearly, this is something where we have to step up our education with kids. You know, that's what you'd hope you would get, or, you know, you find out everything is happening in social media. And that would kind of potentially impact the kind of education you would do with your kids around behavior and values, but you'd focus more on what was showing up in your report.
yeah, and I totally appreciate that, and I think we have the
But yeah,
understanding, but I think
When we
when
roll
it's
it out, we've got to be
shared
very
with
clear about what's the purpose, when do you use this, when do you use
Right.
our existing processes.
Yeah.
Well, and sometimes it might be both, because if I'm an elementary teacher supporting another student that needs to have this form filled out, we'd want to have this data, but it might also end up in EduClimber in some fashion through like whatever our school process is as well, because that gathers data about the things that are happening in school as well, correct?
So if you're helping a kid with an incident in school, you're using EduClimber, but
Right.
Allison's a mom for this, so I'm gonna put you on the spot, Allison. Allison's also a staff member. If
Uh,
Allison sees something with a kid in school,
Oh,
Allison
okay.
is probably going to, using her educator hat at Prairie, put an EduClimber. If you're doing mother over shoulder and, you know, you notice something problematic in social media that one of your sons shows you, then you might use you're not gonna EduClimber
Right,
probably for that, but you might submit a report as a parent
Mhm.
about something you're seeing as problematic. I mean, right now, when something like that happens, if it happens, it's because somebody emails somebody or calls the principal or kind of works it that way. We don't have a formal piece.
Does the data end up in the same place? I mean, if we're using it to track patterns, and some of it's in EduClimber and some of it's in this tool, is there going to be a process created for merging that?
So
in
then
terms
if,
of reflecting on it?
we'd have to look for overlaps, because if again, I'm just gonna keep working this example, Allison, thanks for being a good sport. If Allison submits something as a parent through this, and say it involves high school, and let's say, you know, it goes in, Deanne Lenser picks it up, handles the investigation, and because there's information, kids are identified, it goes into EduClimber, and off you go. Now, I will say, the number of things we can pursue today in social media is different than it was last year because of the action of the Supreme Court. But in principle, that's kind of how it might work. And then, yes, in the reporting, we would need to account for, we had some things in reporting tool, and then here's what we had in EduClimber.
But also, community members obviously don't have access to the staff.
Right,
So
yeah.
this is clearly, if there's stuff, and I'm assuming a lot of things, I mean, you look at the things that are happening, some things happening in the community that are involved with kids. You know, I'm assuming that we utilize something like a parent would utilize something like this to report it. or to make it acknowledged. Now, I don't necessarily know if that's gonna make a difference depending on what the incident actually is, right? If it's, you know, has to do with the school, not has to do with the school, that type of thing, follow up. But I'm assuming like, wouldn't it be separate? Because these incidents, I'm assuming is probably gonna be, yes, school-based, but also community-based. So wouldn't you want something separate?
So, you know, for example, in a community next door to us, there were some kids that were harassing other kids on social media. The kids that were the targets got tired of it. They did their preparation. And the next time there was an incident, they let it play out. They screenshotted everything. They had all the receipts. And then they posted it all to that community's equivalent of Waunakee Can't Be Taught and named names. And it was, as I understand it, quite something. Ideally, you'd like that. And again, if you're fed up, you may just want to, I mean, I don't personally condone it, but I understand people get fed up and they want to put that out there in kind of the town square socially. But that's why you see things in here, like you have a file to upload or a picture to upload. So if you have something like that, you can put it into here and then it all flows into the report.
I don't think there's any concerns of, I mean, there may be incidents, but of teens abusing it, you know, reporting things that necessarily aren't true to just get back at a student, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
You know,
it
teens
would
can
definitely be used as, it would definitely weaponize. I definitely believe it would do that, but that's, yes, part of.
I mean, they do that to an
Yeah.
extent now already. Now, would the anonymity allow for that more greatly? I mean, I think the challenge is, we just have to see how much of a problem it was and develop procedures around that. But in general, this is pretty increasingly commonplace in workplaces, higher ed, and actually really in K-12. I'd say just in the last 2 years, this has really gone from being kind of cutting edge for K-12 to probably about half of the districts would have something like this now. The anonymity, and could people potentially weaponize that? It could happen to an extent, but if there's nothing that really happens and there's no evidence, there's a limit. The bigger risk is a little bit of apprehension on the part of a kid on the initial contact and use of staff time. But I suspect it wouldn't be too big of a deal. And if it was, we'd have to kind of regroup and come up with ways to address that.
You could just use verbiage like false reporting is, I don't know, it's like when you call 911, right, with words. But you would only do that if like you start identifying, like what Tim was saying, that people are abusing this, which I would hope people don't abuse it. But again, that's part of, it's either don't have a tool or have it. Yeah.
I think the one incident I saw based on another public board I served on, they had a reporting tool and some employees were complaining about some not racial, or close to racial incidents that were happening. And then some of the employees who felt they were being targeted by that reporting turned around and started reporting the opposite, that the bias was going the other way. But you pretty much quickly saw the pattern,
Yeah.
which was they happened very quickly. They happened, a lot of them, and they happened right after another report. So that became public under the metrics being reported to the board. And so as soon as they heard that, you can almost see it the next week after the meeting. And it's like, oh, look, now there's 12 reports of the exact opposite of what we were told about last week. Surprise, surprise. So you did figure it out pretty quick.
And again, at some point,
But it
in
does
an
happen.
institution, if you see that kind of, you're not talking about individual pieces, you're talking about something as a community, you may need to have some way to address it in terms of, you know, school meetings, grade level meetings, team meet, I mean, that's bigger than one individual. Clearly, you've got a dynamic, you've got to interrupt it.
So Tim, I do have a question regarding the designee who would actually receive this. So with the question, who would you like your name shared with? Are you sharing, is there a default of who's receiving the report? Because at this point now, the student can then designate who should receive it. So what is the difference between an anonymous report? Who is that report going to versus someone who shares their name on this report and decides to identify the individual, the administrator or the neutral, the non-administration? So what, how, and I could be digging in this way too far, but I would like to know, is there a default individual or the default department where this report will go to when someone chooses not to disclose their identity?
So if,
So
yeah,
how would,
that's,
okay, so, right, you have that, and then if they choose, then obviously they would designate a district staff, and I'm buzzing. So where is the default going to for this report?
so this is something we can talk about, obviously, for feedback. My thinking is if something occurs on a site,
Mhm.
and it's anonymous.
Yep.
I would want the principal and associate principals for that site to be aware of the incident. Because it's their school and they need to be aware of the school climate, things that are happening after hours, things that are happening during the day. So I would say that would be our default,
Okay,
unless somebody puts in their name and then doesn't want it shared with the site.
and I guess it says that reports are reviewed by an administrator in school, but it doesn't identify what the administrator would be, I guess, or it would go through 1 through 4, depending on the incident.
Well, and even like at each school makes it sound like everybody's getting it.
Yeah.
So I just feel like there's a lot of language that needs to be addressed between now and whenever this draft is gonna be ready. And I think this discussion is important, but I also want to call attention to the fact that it's 7. So what are the next steps for this?
So I think there's been a lot of good feedback on the streamlining, both in the survey tool and the discussion here. And this meeting's being recorded, so you can go back and watch the tape. I don't know what your schedule's like. I mean, I can take this back in and try to accurately reflect the dialogue here. I think we want it slimmer, and I think we want more simplified language, and I thought Izzy had a nice piece of advice for us.
So Tim and I have been working on this. So I guess the thing is to make sure this is there when school starts, right? So obviously just collecting basically what Tim said, collecting all the data, listening to what everyone says and just putting it in. And then I'm assuming this thing will probably have some tweaks as it goes on. I don't think it's going to be, you just put it out and that's it. But I think what's important is we don't want to hold this up so it's not there. Because that's what I'm more concerned about, things continuing to happen without it being addressed. So, you know, my schedule's open, so.
And we'll be able to, you know, and again, if there's somebody who wants to connect with us, you know, we would certainly, you know, invite anybody kind of, you know, join us as we go through it. But I mean, I think there's a general consensus here about making everything a little more understandable. Ombudsman is gonna go. We're not Canadian. Americans would have no need to know what an ombudsperson was. No, but I'm serious. That's language, you know, it's very specialized language. You rarely hear it.
And I'm not sure if you guys want to be volunteered, but I think like the language and things like that, you guys might think you might have a better lens for what kids, not kids, I'm sorry,
No,
young
you're good.
adults might respond to better than maybe I might or whatever.
I mean, even younger kids, right? We should
Yeah.
probably test it out. You know, we have some younger kids just kind of say, well,
Yeah.
No one volunteering their children.
I have a
will.
12 and a 10-year-old. I'll volunteer
I got
them.
an 11 and 14.
I'll have my boy take it.
Okay, so let's Could we move on? Everyone's good?
Thank you, everybody.
All right, thank you for your time on that. All right, so the next thing is, and we're gonna get everybody out on time, okay? The next thing is creation of a glossary of terms to be posted. We spoke about that on our last meeting. So really, it's, was you wanna talk more about that since you brought that up?
So what I was suggesting at the last meeting is that we would really think about shared language here at the district. And what shared language looks like in our schools, among our teachers. How do we want to communicate that to our students? How do we adopt that? So I think that we discussed having a committee of about 3 of us that would sort of go through and talk about what shared language would look like for our schools. Now, that shared language, as was pointed out today, that we may have to look at it based on the grades.
So could you give like kind of an example so people know when you start to talk about shared language, what does that mean?
Yeah. So shared language, when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, first of all, is having an understanding of what equity is. Having an understanding, I mean, some people, I won't say, some people often think that equity is synonymous with equality. Well, it's not. It really isn't. So understanding what is the difference between equality and equity. What does inclusion mean to you? Inclusion might be a very narrow definition to one person, but inclusion is really a broad sense of its word, and how do we sort of live out that inclusion. So I think that would be, definitions and understanding what it means to our community environment, and why it's important to the school district. Why is that important? I'm being very simplistic with this, but these are just examples, important examples. How do we communicate in a way that is consistent? You remember when we started our meetings, we talked about sort of guidelines or ground rules for our meetings, ensuring that everyone has an opportunity to speak. So it's almost within that same principle, having sort of this common language throughout our educational community.
Another thing to add to that is how we address people, right? I mean, sometimes I see the word color and, so kind of like, and that's a different thing too. We should be going through our policies and everything else and making sure those things are updated. But I feel like there's so many areas where things have changed that we should all be up on that change. So, because sometimes it's hard, we don't know. Do we say this? Do we not say this? Is it okay to say this? So I think maybe that could be added to that as well.
Exactly.
So we have that conversation. So people will feel free to be able to talk about something without feeling.
There's policies that are written that are incredibly dated that we need to update to ensure that it meets our shared language, right? I think there was a policy that we saw the word color in it. Yeah, it came up the last time, right, exactly. So we want to be sensitive and respectful. Yeah.
I think an important part here is, I know some of you have watched board meetings, and I apologize for how long they go. But there's been a lot of questions, and it's happening in other school districts too that have DEI committees, is that definition between equity and equality is very important. And I think for a DEI committee to continue, which I think it should, a vision statement almost of what getting to diversity, getting to equity, getting to inclusion means. And when you said, what does it mean in our district? I think that's an important part. And when we talk about this committee into the future, having those definitions and having a vision of how to implement that definition is going to be very important to making sure the community understands how and why we're doing it.
And I think those are the conversations when we have the conversation we had before. I think the more we start doing those things, we're going to hopefully get to that place with that vision. Because I think so many people are unsure. I don't say so many people, I don't use that. I think there's a lot of people who are short, but there's some people who just are more reserved. So you kind of have to just kind of put it out there so they feel more comfortable.
I mean, I was very surprised when I had one of the people in the Ho-Chunk Nation in their administration say that American Indian is actually the legal governmental term. And you sit there going, Native American Indian. It's like, oh no, American Indian is actually the term they use on almost all their official documents. You sit there going, I thought that was supposed to go away. It's like, no, it really, I was stunned because you thought you were avoiding it all the time. That's why you're right. We do need to establish some of those words that should be used in whatever policy statement or we're doing.
Well, I think definitions are a part of it, and choice of terminology is also going to be individual, right? Someone may not prefer that term used, so maybe part of it is
Right,
that-
but we should have a standard for what
Standard, yeah.
we're doing in our district.
certainly for policy
In the
and
policy.
stuff like that, but I think to teach about definitions
Mm-hmm.
and to pretend that everyone uses the same terminology, I think is.
So that's not the goal. That certainly isn't the goal. When I don't expect, when I talk about shared language, it is done in a respectful manner. But I mean, I've heard people say, oh, that person is Chinese. Typically we say that person is Asian, right? But I understand exactly. But it's not, the goal is not to instruct someone in how they speak, because of course that's going to still happen. I do think that we need to develop sort of that shared language that is fundamental to the work that we do within this community and within this committee. I think that is fundamental to us. That's really the goal here. The purpose of it, we know that it's really the work that we do in principle. It is not the work that we expect people to just flip the switch and say, oh my gosh, all of a sudden I'm going to stop using colored people. Now I'm going to use Black.
Well, and I
African American.
appreciate you bringing it
Yeah.
back to this conversation, because in some of our first meetings, we thought it would be important for us to come
Yeah.
to common language. and we
That's
never did
right.
that, so.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's where it came from as well, because we
Yeah.
did talk about this.
We did,
just never
yeah.
Did it.
Yeah.
And again, I think this is also something that's open, right? It's not like all of a sudden we make a list and there's like 20 words and definitions that we can't add to it. And again, we all individually have certain things we refer to. I think about African American, like some people don't want to say that. They'll say Black,
Yeah.
right? But maybe they don't want to be. Then I know some friends who want to be called Negroes. Now I don't want to be called that, but I have friends who do, right? But then they have reasons for that, or indigenous. So, I mean, there's a lot of terminology that you'd be like, what? Kind of like what you said, Dave, about like saying Indian or Native American. I always thought too, right? You don't say Indian, that's not okay. But you're saying that, they have that.
As a legal term.
As a legal term.
Okay.
But what I'm saying is that, we also want to be careful not to dismiss things just because we think it's
Yeah.
correct. Like, I think that's where we don't want to fall into. So what I want to do, just to kind of make this short so we can keep moving on. So who wants to volunteer to be on that definition word committee?
I'd help with it. Yeah, I just in one comment, I think there's two pieces that I think of, because I'm right there in the shared definitions. I also think that these shared definitions will evolve, and the larger part of it is an awareness piece,
Yeah.
because we know that there's a shared definition, with an awareness that we want to honor the perspective of the group being represented, and that may evolve over time, and that's where we have that sensitivity and the awareness as it comes. But I would love to do that.
So Leslie, I don't want to volunteer.
So,
Oh, as I'm pointing at you.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So what's this again?
So I'm gonna try to do, we're trying to
Just
do
happen.
like subcommittees, so this way we
What
can
did
get the work done.
Joel just do?
So basically, we need this list created, right?
Yes.
So we need a creation person for people.
Mhm.
So
So,
could I just clarify, so you're talking about clarifying words for our students. I'm just
yeah,
thinking about audience,
So-
everybody.
because I've been thinking about the public comment that we had at our last meeting about, could you define for our community so there's transparency? When you're talking about whatever, what do you mean by that? And at that community conversation that we had, there were a lot of questions that were just, what do you mean by this word?
Yeah.
So I almost feel like we could have, here are words that we want our students and staff to know, and here are words that we want our community to know, because it seems like there's confusion and or misinformation
Yeah.
about what we mean when we're saying, certain words.
Can I ask a question on that? Why would that list be different?
I don't know if it would be,
Yeah.
but I'm thinking about things like, I've heard CRT thrown around.
Yeah.
And that could mean critical race theory, or it could mean culturally relevant teaching. I don't know that our students need to know about that. Like, that's just extra information for them. But I feel like maybe our community needs to know.
Yeah, I think
So-
whatever,
But shouldn't they
Yeah.
also be doing,
whatever efforts we put forth would be for, this is all public
yeah,
information, so I think that
Yeah.
it's all fair game at that point.
but isn't there a point too where people need to do their research, right? Like, I mean, we put it out there and obviously what we're trying to do is, it's a common thing, right? I don't think we're gonna be defining everything and putting everything out there. But I think, again, for us to have this conversation, there has to be some basic, things that people just know.
I think that there are different places that people can research, and I would like them to research from us.
Doesn't
Or at
it
least
seem though
have
that-
something that we had with some deliberation
So
prepared.
right,
that
yeah,
For the sake of our work,
Exactly.
here's what these terms mean.
Exactly, right, exactly. And also to build on it, any initiative, we would also find links that would help with clarification as well. But obviously, it would be something that is relevant and credible.
Doesn't it seem though we have a scope? I mean, for us, this is the WCSD DEI ad hoc committee. And the terminology or the vision or whatever we work on falls underneath that. And I agree with you about the community and everything, and I really hope the village gets caught up and the other surrounding communities and start doing things like that. But for us, for what we're doing, it's about the school district and within the school district. I think part of the reason some of the people are coming with strong questions about this committee is because they worry it's going, their thought process is it is going way beyond what it's supposed to be doing. So for us within our document, within this committee, it would seem that it's got to be about the school district and within what is it diversity means in this committee, working within this school district. What does that term mean? It's not, it's going to be pretty close to what everyone else is going to say, but it might not be exactly. If that makes sense.
And I hear that, no, because you're right, because obviously we're trying to focus what's happening in the school district, not, now obviously the community is part of the school district, but we do have to focus on that, because if we get, and I'm working on that as well too. If we get too broad, like we want to stay away from that too, right? Because we don't want to be, there's just a lot of other issues that could come up. So I think maybe the focus should be is really the common language that we have here, what we want our staff and our students to be aware of, right? That doesn't necessarily mean they have to go by that, but at
Well, I
least they
think
have
the
an
purpose of
understanding.
it is to ensure that any type of written document, rather if it's a policy or any type of form of communication, that the language that is used is consistent with what we, which was the district.
So
So you got two people.
yeah, we got two people. That's awesome.
No, it's supposed to be three.
Who said that?
It would, I think, having a couple different minds to talk through it. I mean, when you're unpacking language, there are always different viewpoints. And not that I want to volunteer anyone else, because it is timely. I think it is good to have multiple minds around the
So I have
table.
an idea. How about you two? And we have it in open document, right? So people can add to it. Right? So, I'm just trying to say, so just say people have terminology. So just say they look, because some people just don't want to commit, right? So just if we put it.
I get that. I'm following you.
If we put it, seriously, and this should not be something where it's like you're on the weekends and, oh, I'd rather be like on the beach,
Well,
no, that's.
Mike
Yeah.
Masani's not here.
Let's volunteer.
We can volunteer.
We can volunteer here, but what I'm saying is, so, anybody can join this committee, but I think
We'll
it needs to
figure
get
that out.
started.
That's
So I feel like if we put it on the, on the board, like it's an open board thing where people can add.
I would like to volunteer Mike Brandt.
Yes, you're right.
The best way to volunteer is to not be at the.
Yes. Okay,
But
so,
before you move on though, that part of this also needs to be part of professional development,
yeah,
that shared language, so it goes also beyond the written
yeah,
language.
because really, I mean, I think about it more when you start talking about policies and stuff and then combing through all that and looking at language. So you're right, it's not just about a piece of paper that we're putting there.
Exactly.
But I feel like everything that we're doing is, there's a goal to it. It's not just because we're putting something out as a committee.
Exactly.
So I thank you.
We're gonna build off this work.
We'll
Yes,
make that happen.
Yes.
And at
yes.
some point, we're going to have recommendations, and so
Yeah,
that
it would be
glossary is going
recommendations, yeah.
to accompany
Yeah,
that,
that's
so
awesome.
people
Yeah.
can understand.
Yeah, how's that coming along?
First recommendation is extend the time frame for the recommendation.
Okay,
Common military.
okay, so next thing is updates on board actions and decisions that would be informational to the committee. I don't think there's anything right now, because I think we spoke about that stuff before, obviously, once the board meeting comes up. But now, actually, I don't want to say that.
I do have a question about, there will be a recommendation from the goals committee about a topic that we discussed here, correct?
There was a recommendation about removing
Yeah.
mural in gym. The current recommendation is just to remove the mural, not for what its ultimate disposition would be, or what to replace it. That has not been decided. That part's probably going towards the whole branding process, which is probably not going to be done before spring, as to what to replace it with or what might else be done. But I think right now it's pretty limited scope of just about that mural itself.
And a lot of that stuff is posted online too. I know I'm not talking Waunakee get the talk, I'm talking about it's actually posted online.
It was in the
And
paper
it
today.
was on the, yeah, that's what I read. It was
You can go
all,
watch, shameless advertising, go watch the goals committee on the YouTube board.
yes. So there's ways to kind of get this information, so.
Right,
think
I
it's
just mean,
important.
I think if it's something that came, it's part of the discussion. And so
Yeah.
I would love for there to be a practice that if there's board discussion or decision around something that is related.
Okay,
Yeah, and for
Just
those
so
who
that everyone
haven't,
is in the know.
Yeah.
that's a great
Last
point.
time
And for
Okay.
those that have not read the article or caught the
I
meeting,
have not.
the gist of it was that the goals, so the board's direction on this was to remand it to the goals committee, but the goals committee would be joined by some individuals that Randy would recruit. So both of our Indigenous staff members, Tim Decor and Josh Cash, they were there. We had two representatives from the Ho-Chunk Nation, one in person, one via Zoom. They're in an official capacity. And we had one of the alumni, there were the two alumni who created the painting in the first place. And so one of them was there to kind of explain how it all came to pass in the beginning, which was about 1974. So there's a lot of good information. We heard from both Indigenous persons in our community and official representatives of the nation whose historical land the district sits on. So we had that aspect to it. And then two of the three people on the committee were there. The committee voted 2-0, as Dave said. And it's on the district YouTube, the board's YouTube channel. You can go and kind of watch the entire, there is actually a very good dialogue. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check it out.
The the paper actually did a very good
Yes.
summary of it too. It was, I didn't see any flaw. He got almost up to the main point.
So yes, I heard you with making sure that, so everybody is on board. I guess my fault. I look, again, I guess we all get information in different places.
Yeah, and I don't live in the community, so it's.
Okay.
And it's summer,
Okay.
so thank you.
Definitely, I will be more aware of that. Remind me if I'm not. Anything else on that topic?
I do appreciate if there are agenda topics that's been discussed with the board, and if it warrants further discussion here, I think that's important.
I mean, they discussed us, but
I did
it
watch those
went from
before
us
last
to
night.
the other committees, so like, we're really not in the loop anymore.
No, but I said if it's warrant,
Oh, okay,
I said if it warrant.
Okay.
Yeah, further discussion.
Well, and I think I had brought this a while ago too, but I think this question in particular, because there was quite a bit of stuff that was going on, earlier in the spring. One of the things was too is, I know Nehemiah was supposedly gonna do an audit of like the social studies curriculum. And did that ever go on?
So Nehemiah was doing a few things. It was never going to do an audit of the social studies curriculum. Nehemiah has been doing some professional development workshops with their teachers of social studies. Most of those are complete. The last two will happen in some of our upcoming staff development programs. And that'll really complete the main body of work with Nehemiah. Now, Nehemiah also has a course on African American history called Black History for a New Day, which typically is an evening course. We've had one staff member go to it, and I think probably 1,000 or so residents of Dane County have been through it. But what we are going to do is in the second semester, there's an option. It's kind of one of the silver linings of the pandemic. They've taken what used to be an evening in-person course and they've made it digitally available. So we're going to create an opportunity for nowhere near as large a group as have been working with Nehemiah, but these would be social studies teachers who would be expecting to teach Black history in their courses. And we would get them the Black History for a New Day course to make sure they have it back then. So that'll be happening in the second semester.
I just want to remind everyone, it's also important if you do have ideas, please just, so if you want to see them on the agenda, please let Rebecca know, just in a timely fashion, just so she could put it on there so we can have those discussions.
Can you give us a little idea? Like, I think there's one meeting that you sent a poll out for remaining, and then do we know where we're headed after that, or is that still?
Yeah, so
TBD?
I'm not done yet.
There's some
But there's still more agenda items.
Oh, good. Keep going.
No, but it's gonna be quick. But
I'm sorry.
No, but it'll answer your question.
Okay.
Okay. All right, so the next thing is discussion of the district response about national and local incidences. We don't really have anything that's going on right now nationally. I mean, there are things happening nationally, but that we're gonna discuss. Correct? Just want to make sure. Okay. All right, so the next thing, future meetings. So the equity audit scorecard, we definitely have to do that. The reason why I didn't do it this time is because obviously we did last meeting, we spent several hours completing that. Thank you to the people who did that, who attended. So obviously we have to do the scorecard. So what we're going to do is Rebecca already sent out the poll to figure out when we're going to meet. And it looks like August 23rd at 6, August 24th at 6.
Well, if you want 2 meetings this month yet, I would suggest looking at August 16th and the 23rd, because you're gonna want them at least a week apart.
Okay. So August 16th, we had a lot of people who said that they, based off this, 10 people. And then what was the other one you said, Rebecca?
The 23rd or the 24th. That, if you're gonna have two meetings, I would suggest having one on the 16th and one either the 23rd or 24th.
Okay.
If you think one meeting's good enough, then you
It seems like they said probably 2.
So this is something we should talk about, but I mean, to me, we have to have a report ready by the September board meeting, which is the second Monday of September. So I would recommend we have one meeting where we go through the scorecard and kind of highlight what our findings are and kind of put a skeleton to a draft. And then we have a very small writing team go away in the next few days, put that into writing. And then the purpose of the second meeting would be to actually look at the draft, make any changes we need, but make sure it was something that was representative of the views of the committee. I worry if we have one meeting, we'll decide on the outline, but then the actual document gets done someplace else and never comes back to the committee. And I don't think we want that to happen. I think we want the full document to come back to the committee. Now, the second meeting in particular might not be a long meeting, or it might be, but I think 2 meetings, that would be my.
And I would like to just add one thing. When Tim says the meeting on the second Monday of September, I need to have that information in my hand on September 8th in order to release it for that agenda.
For the
So it's-
board?
Yeah.
September 8th?
Yeah.
Okay. So we'll probably just do 2. So August 16th at 6, looks like, and then we'll do August 23rd.
There
Okay.
was no week, the board's not giving any leeway and giving one more month, or is it?
Well, I think the original idea was that we'd have this done by Monday. And I said I didn't think that would work out too well. And then they said they're eager to see it, and they are eager, I think, to do a community linkage meeting around this topic. And I mean, I'll defer to our board member who's on the committee. My sense was the thinking that having this document in hand would be a good thing to have before the linkage meeting. Am I doing that justice, Dave?
Yes, I mean, they obviously want to do a linkage meeting sooner than later. And it'd be having a large public meeting, the entire public's invited. We give they've been done in the past around co-curriculars or around
We did the sex.
building and
Right.
facilities. So they announce it publicly, send it out as wide as possible. Everyone from the entire community is invited. They'll do a brief presentation and then they'll usually break up into large discussion groups to get public input on it.
So that's like ideal in October, because if you keep pushing it, then we're getting too close to holidays again.
And I mean, I think if we did it at the September meeting, it'd be hard to do that linkage meeting before early October. And if you do it in the October meeting, now you're into November, and that's horrible time-wise.
Can I ask a quick question? Because I'm about ready to jump and say I'll help with writing. And so is the vision that we have our criteria and that we give them, not raw, but give them the summative data as well as recommendations of focus within each criteria? Or is the vision that we have recommendations within each criteria based on what we identify as critical issues within that criteria? Or is that something we have to decide next time?
I think that's something to decide next.
Yeah, we have to
time.
decide that
I mean,
next
We
time.
may have different ideas around the table.
Right, right,
Just
okay.
I do think we need to know kind of what we need for next meeting though. I mean, for future meetings here, it says any equity audit scorecard, and just as a cursory update, Allison has prepared, we had that notes document and we just took out notes and simplified. She used like a stoplight, red, green, yellow side. Is that what we need for next meeting, or is there something more?
I mean, it's really, isn't it summarizing everything?
Yeah, here it is, I spilled water on it, but I was looking at the other.
Like I just went through, because I missed the last meeting, I was
Yeah.
out of town, and I just took the notes of like what was placed at and just condensed it all into like a table. There's one page for each. And then if it was on like kind of like the not apparent or like that's what I kind of like as red, like on the lower end, if we like quoted a 1 or 2 on it. And I linked in any discussion comments, like specifically in there, if there were related to that. But they're also the link to all the discussion notes are in there as well.
You know, but I also feel like when we make a recommendation, right, it should be what we find off of that.
Right.
But I
So-
can like hear this discussion points here, like I went through just myself the other day because I saw it there and I was like, oh, I'm gonna read what we wrote, 'cause, you know. I mean, I think it would be homework for everybody to take a look at this, you know, we have improving, emerging, you know, listed, but in your opinion, looking at what we answered as a score, maybe kind of starring like, okay, this is what I would see number A in criteria 1, in my opinion, is something that we need to work on. And then from there, I think this is kind of similar to some of the stuff we did in the other committee.
Yeah.
And then putting it up and maybe all kind of voting and getting to a point where we have now a good list. And even your stuff on here, B, C, and D, I think all those points were things that we covered in here as well as things we need to, that are priorities.
So the only problem, not problem, but I don't want to revisit everything that we already did, right? So I feel like this is like the final thing that because I think if we all start doing opinions, right, and saying, well, I think this is this, then we're going to be going back and kind of revisiting things that we've decided as a group.
I think if I'm hearing Michelle, I think you guys are actually pretty close, because I think what I hear
Well,
you
here's
saying,
like an
Michelle, is.
example, schools
yeah.
exemplify readiness for all students, this is criteria 1. And we have improving in a lot of things, it's emerging in these things, but as I read through these things, you can say, well, we put emerging for this one, but really like, is school administrators, is health screenings, is that really priority over the opportunity exists for all students in our community to access high quality learning programs? Well, I would think A is more important than that. And then what does that mean? Like, why did we put emerging? And what does that then mean? Like for our community, and what did we really mean by that and having better learning programs? Was there something specific that we wanted to, you know, I don't know. I just feel like we are.
Maybe there's a way to look at this. Every year, the board has to go through a self-analysis of itself, which has all these categories. We do a board evaluation. And you name all these targets, like, did we do this?
I think this
Are-
work
are
has
we
already
far
been
enough
done. I
along
think
on
we're
that?
discussing something that people have already put time
Yeah.
into. So
We did.
before we
Allison, I think,
discuss
has done
further-
something that's pretty
Well,
comprehensive.
I think the 2 of you were creating an
We
agenda.
created
correct?
an
And you had
agenda
a
that
decision-making
follows the
agenda.
process you're suggesting, where it allows us to go back over the data, looking at it through high impact areas, looking at it through areas of urgency and things like that. We have to find a way to scale it down, because I think when we created it, we thought we had a 3-hour meeting, but I think we were gonna streamline it to be able to do that process so that we could come out with ideas of theories of change of, if we do this, then this will happen. And it kind of just allows us to tap back into the data, pick those high impact pieces, and then create a report off of it to then move forward. Do you want to add to that at all?
Yeah, well, and I was going to say, you know, what we had thought about was when we thought we hadn't looked at the data for a long time, so we needed to revisit it. And we actually started doing something very similar to what you ended up doing with the finding, you know, the red light, green light kind of thing. And it was just simply to help people pull out what they were perceiving as critical issues, but also leave room for pieces, because the equity audit didn't exactly capture every single element of equity in education. But so leave room for other emerging issues that have been highlighted by this group. But we planned on a 3-hour meeting, so I think we would have to do some sort of, you know, homework guided questions. I think I also sent some guided questions to get to theory of change. I might have sent that to
You sent it
Laura
to
and
us, I
Tim, I
think.
think.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could try to find something where we do some guiding questions for people to think about. But if we're gonna actually have a discussion within an 1.5-hour framework to be able to get to what our findings will be like, we've got to rock and roll and really do some pre-work. That's my personal opinion.
But I think if we all do our homework and we review the document that Allison pulled together, which I think is.
Is that helpful? I'm
I
not
think it's
offended that
extremely
no one
good
likes it.
resource.
I can change
Yeah.
it.
And then and then again, it's gonna need some looking at, because you're right, it's gonna have to really move. But I think the framework that, you know, Diane and Laura prepared is a framework that would help us. By the end of the first meeting, if we've got our targets, and then we have a writing committee that then puts that into a draft, and the drafting would really have to happen within days, so the committee could see the draft in advance of the second meeting. I think it could all come together in 2 meetings.
When you say draft, you mean recommendations or a summary of the results of the audit?
I think you need to avoid the summary and go to the recommendations.
Recommendations and
If you don't
potentially-
give recommendations to the board of what you want to see done next year, there's a bit of a movement to wipe this committee out and have nothing happen afterwards.
Don't
If
they
you give
want
them-
something behind it though?
Your identification and your chart and scorecard is what's behind it.
Okay.
But
then
at some point, you gotta pull out and
Okay,
say,
action
here's
steps.
the 6 action items that need to
Got
be done. And that's what I was trying to get to. That's what the board does. Here's all of our problems and what we did. What are we gonna do next year? That's what the recommendations have to say. Otherwise, what do you want to have happen?
They're not gonna care about it. I mean, they are gonna care about the data, but what
Well,
I'm saying is
they
we do have to
seem
make a
like they have no
recommendation.
idea what had been happening in my view of what I saw during the meeting. And so I just wanted to make sure that we were being responsible about sharing, like, how many cumulative hours have we all spent?
But
together
I
on doing
think,
this?
but I think the thing
A
is
lot.
that we're always gonna have that. So if someone wants to say, where are you getting this from? We can show them
Got it.
that. But what Dave said, you're right. We need to come out of here with, you need to, well, not you need to, you don't have that authority. You get to say no. So we recommend that.
You do X, Y, Z.
Yes, just, and I agree with that, but yes, you're right. A lot of people put in a lot of time and effort. But what I'm saying is that we're always gonna have that, right? That's what's going to give us credibility in that sense. But I feel like you just need to come out with that. And
I
that's.
just
really
want to
what I
make
was
sure
saying.
that we're gonna be having a product that is what they're. looking for.
Yeah, so let me can I just throw something out here that might be, I don't know. How do we make a recommendation without having justification or without having something to back up the why behind the recommendation? I mean, with all
Isn't
of the
there a-
work.
I mean,
Isn't
I
that
think we can
tool, the
cite the
recommendation?
results of
So you
the
should
audit.
be able to, right, exactly. Somehow or another, when you make the recommendation, though, you have to be able to reference what was that based on. This is an instrument here, so we should be able to show some data.
Yeah, these are the highlights. These are the high impact areas because, what was
Right.
some of the reasons?
Exactly.
And they don't need to
right.
know the entire bank of data.
No.
But what was our selection? What was our
Exactly.
criteria for
Right.
selecting those areas?
Exactly, because I'm afraid that we're just throwing a whole bunch of recommendations without giving the why behind.
Give an example here, like number the C here, it says discussion of district hiring practices using a diverse workforce. We could say that that is our recommendation and why. Well, because it is in criteria 3 in this thing. And we felt that we do not follow this, and therefore this is why we're recommending.
That's a
Exactly.
good example. It's
Right.
sitting there saying, we need a discussion about more diverse workforce, and but I'm just throwing this out, not saying it's happening. The school district is using very standard Wisconsin school district ways of putting job applicant on, what's that called? Weekend. They put it out on weekend. Well, really, we have the Madison School of Education sitting right next, UW sitting right next to us. We need to go to their hiring fair and sit at a table and do that from now. That's the recommendation. That's what we need to do. Our reasoning behind that is look at our current workforce and
Right.
we are underrepresented.
Exactly.
And that's it.
That's.
You don't have to
exactly what we
spend
need to
3
do.
hours saying why. We know we spent 3 hours coming up with why. But there's got to be an action item for the
Yeah.
board to say, this is how it goes forward.
Right. exactly. Well, what you just said had part of the why in there.
Yes.
But it's a very short one. It's only as long as the recommendation.
What I'm afraid, what I didn't want is putting recommendations in front of the board without giving sort of context to it.
I mean, I don't think that was what people were, I didn't think that was, because obviously I don't think we're just gonna say, you know, do
Do this
this.
I mean, that's why it's good to have the two meetings.
Yeah,
I mean, I think we identify what the recommendations are in the first meeting. A small writing team is gonna, I think, draw really largely from Allison's document, which is pulled together everything we've talked about in the audit. And then if we do that and we still find there may be some supporting pieces that weren't right in what Allison had, we've got other documents in the shared folder. They may have come up in conversation,
Right.
just not made it into the notes. And the writing team could pull those in. And then I think the purpose of the second meeting is, do we think the whole thing is properly presented? And then there'll have to be a conversation about who actually presents that in person to the board in September. That's another topic.
So what's going to, so what are the next steps then?
But
Will
that's-
something be sent to us in the emails?
No, I'm saying not it.
Well, but you can
send what you have, right?
Well,
send the
Rebecca
piece
sends
you've done.
it,
Yeah.
right? And
Yeah.
she's already-
And
No, Rebecca sent it, I'm
Yes,
sorry,
yes.
but
Right.
It's in
Share
the
it.
shared drive.
Right.
And it's in there. Yeah, I just put it in there.
okay.
So if it facilitates that all, there were 3 points that we thought we needed to cover to get to recommendations. Review and analyze the opportunity audit data table, which is that. Identify priority areas considering level of impact, urgency, ease of implementation. And then come prepared to offer your thoughts as to a theory of change that may serve as the foundation of strategy recommendations. So if we do this, then this would happen. Kind of there, and that can be the basis of discussion to just get our conversation going. And we had all sorts of activities behind this, but those were the 3 highlights.
So, and that meeting's only an hour and a half, so it's not a
Yeah.
3-hour
Right,
meeting.
right.
So
No.
we really need to make sure that we're focused and kind of discuss what we need to discuss.
One is that where the homework
The-
comes
yeah.
first, so that the discussion is ready to happen.
So the homework is basically just reading over the information.
Did we have
Without giving-
something that we were gonna, did we have the guiding questions that we could send along? Because I think the goal was to read each piece of data and come up with 2 or 3 takeaways from each
Yeah.
section. And then essentially, we would have you share with somebody, a small group. And then we go to the next section. That's when we thought we had 3 hours. And to
Yeah.
save time, we may not have something from each section,
Correct.
but you pick top 3 to 5.
There were 7 discussion questions. What positive outcomes would you like to achieve and are associated with the element? If addressed, what elements may have the highest impact in terms of positive outcomes? How can this outcome be measured? What does this element impact? What is the ease of implementation? Who must take action? How urgent is this element? Is there an order of change? Must some things be addressed before others? What actions or activities could be implemented and what are your assumptions? I know that's a lot, but we
Yeah,
were
understood.
jamming.
Yeah.
All right, so how do we conclude this audit?
Is there a way to poll it? Like, I don't know, keep polling things. Does our homework also include some kind of poll so we come prepared with like, okay,
How about we do like we do the board one's very similar in how the card is done. Is we could send out a sheet to everyone. You go into each section and under that section, you say, what's the most important
Yeah.
1 or 2 items in that section that needs to be part of a recommendation. Then by the time we come back here, Rebecca does her infamous rolling all the comments into one document. And then you would see section, I'll do it if you want.
Google Forms can do that.
I'm really, Google Forms can do it. We can do a cut and paste. And basically, you'll have section 1 and it'll have 7 or 8 different recommendations. And we pick the 1 or 2 that we think are the most important. Saves the time of trying to identify them in an open discussion. You at
Okay,
least have. the
So that'll be
ones already
done
there.
via email.
Do that via email.
Are you volunteering to do that? Or are you doing?
Sure.
I just wanted to clarify so that we know where it's coming from.
Well, the reason why I'm asking is because I'm not available on the 16th or the 23rd. And so I wanted to be able to have some input. That's the reason why I'm asking. I can't, there were among the dates I wasn't available.
Oh, that's right
Mel
there.
has a question here.
I just wanted to reiterate Gina's
You're on
point.
mute now. Oh.
Okay.
Can you hear me
We're
now?
on mute now. We're gonna come up with problems.
I just want to reiterate Gina's point that if we're going to pre-vote or have some sort of survey as our homework, like I don't want us to cluster it by criteria, because there are some criteria that we were green, almost green for all of them. And then there were some criteria that there were multiple elements of red. So I don't want us to say 2 or 3 from a criteria. I want it broader than that personally, just because like criteria 1, for example, already looks pretty green and yellow, but there were a few that had multiple red. So I just wanted to reiterate that point if we're doing some sort of homework that requires us to narrow it down.
And that's fine. We just don't put a limit on it. You know, make as many comments under each criteria as you want. And we may have whole sections that there's nothing
Oh, yeah.
because there's nothing there. That's fine.
But even those red areas, they still might not be as important as an emerging thing in a different area.
Exactly.
Right, just because it's red doesn't mean it's
Yeah,
something
or
that.
just because it was something the state recommended,
Yeah.
we don't follow, maybe it's something we don't even need to follow. So
So do we rank order them instead of just picking?
I would say you just put the comment in the criteria. That at least gets rid of the open-ended discussion that starts it. And then we get there and we go down in that section and we vet that section out among the ones that were sent in. It's just a way to cut the time.
And then maybe in the end, we're not even looking at a whole section, maybe
Yeah.
we're looking at the priorities all in this section.
Yeah, we just look at the data and trends from it. The other thing, Leslie, as we're talking about defining, I'm wondering if we can come up with those definitions before the board meeting and before the community linkage stuff. Because I think that all wrapped in.
We can do that before we couldn't do it before the 16th.
If you do it at least equity versus equality.
Oh, I mean,
I did that definition and I showed a nice example of that.
So we can work this. Yeah.
I'm sure
it would
there's
be
a
it.
brain pop or an ed puzzle that describes that.
Yes.
I'm positive, my 5th grader or
Yeah.
6th grader watched it.
All right, I just want to move on just because I promised that we're going to get out and I lied. It's
Sorry, so do we
7:53.
need somebody to make a form?
I'm sorry, say that
Do
again?
we need somebody to make a form? Do you actually want to make a form or do you need, like, I can make a form.
Yeah, Dave.
Oh, no, go ahead if you want.
Okay.
You guys have been doing this longer than I have. I don't want to.
Or could it be taking that scorecard and just adding, I can share it with that document, or I think it's editable by all of us, but just adding.
I mean, I was just
And
gonna
that can
take
be
the
our
scorecard, take the major category, put it there, and then say, and then give you a drop down underneath it, and you fill it out.
Sure.
I mean, That's
Yeah,
really
that's
all
totally
it
fine.
is.
I just didn't want it to be like, you were the last man standing.
No.
Good.
A clarifying question.
So Dave, you're going to send it out? Oh, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. When as we're sending that survey out, are we looking at the whole set of data to be able to consider the viewpoints? Or are we looking at the green and the yellow and the red to fill it out?
You look at the whole set and you decide what you think is the most important things that we need to get to. I mean, some things might be green, but they're so critical that it's more important than an item that's red that, oh no, we didn't fill out the state reported thing to DPI that they filed away. Who cares?
So I'm wondering if
Should
there's
I
a way to
remove the
combine.
colors?
Well, I
No,
like
no,
the
the
colors.
colors
Don't move them
Colors are
here.
good.
Because I
The
think I don't
colors
think
are
that's
good,
suitable.
and then do you have the other specific statements in yours as well?
It's linked in
It's in that
there.
document.
Yeah, it's, if you want to review
Awesome.
like more, it's linked
Yeah,
at the top.
what I would also recommend is for it to come with instructions. Just
Instructions, survey,
Folks.
data.
Dave, you got a lot of work to do.
I think you probably.
This is a lot smaller than.
Am I sending it to Bethany or Dave? I don't.
I'm gonna do both of them. Okay. We'll figure it out. They'll arm wrestle.
No, well, I think we just have to create a form that Rebecca sends to everybody and then we cut and paste them all in together. That's all it is.
All right.
So is that Bethany?
Sure.
Okay.
My notes actually say Bethany will come from Allison and Dave.
Wait, isn't Dave doing it? I'm
Awesome.
confused.
How did that happen?
Dave Ross.
Roped in.
So who's doing it?
We'll talk.
We'll figure it out.
So you guys will figure it out?
As long as we've got,
Two people.
we know who's moving it forward, because we don't have that many days in here.
Yeah.
So.
I can do it right now and share it with you.
Okay, so I'm just gonna keep going on so we can adjourn. So the next thing was discussion of recommendations to the district to further equity for other issues, including building accessibility, audits of accessibility for websites, discussion of district progress on the removal of Native American imagery. C was discussion of district hiring practices, ensuring a diverse workforce, and D, discussion of district curriculum on the teaching of issues involving race and ethnicity in the United States. So we basically talked about some of that stuff, but those are things that are going to be in future meetings. So we don't really need to have a discussion on that right now. If there's nothing else, can we adjourn? Could I have a motion?
I move to adjourn.
Second.
Someday
All
I'm gonna get
who-
it first.
who-
Someday.
Who agree?
I'm just not quick.
I.
Those who oppose? Okay, we're adjourned.
What
Thank you,
happens if
everyone.
somebody opposes?
I said that.
I guess we have to.